Hello, my name is Matthew Ogden, and welcome to a special broadcast from LPAC TV. I have today with me in the studio Lyndon LaRouche, Diane Sayer, and Rachel Brown, two members of the national candidate slate. And then hooked up over live video stream, we have today Summer Shields, Bill Roberts, Keisha Rogers, and Dave Christie. And this is the second such broadcast that we've done, following on the one that we did last weekend. And I should also say that this is also a prelude to a special live broadcast that Mr. LaRouche will be doing this coming Wednesday on this website, which will be his State of the Union address. But since we convened here last week, I think we saw another demonstration of precisely what we said last weekend, that with these New Hampshire primaries, the Republican candidate slate is nothing but a bunch of clowns, and dangerous clowns. Which is the point that we made last week. Meanwhile, we've got a fascist in the White House, and as we saw at the end of last weekend, the Euro system has taken another step downwards towards utter collapse. So with that situation, the point is that we've got to take charge of this election process, and that's precisely what we intend to do here today. So I give you Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
There are a few preliminary points which are not surprises, but they come this week because I thought other things were more important last week. And our discussion in last week's session and what happened in between indicates what some of the questions are which should be prominent in our attention right now. The first thing to emphasize always, remember we're only a limited number of candidates here out of a total national slate. And some people will say, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean really very much. Because if you saw so far in the Republican primaries, you saw that you had a couple of people in the primaries that were actually serious people. Most of them were not. Most of them are probably ridiculous, is the best term for them. And they should just get out of politics unless they got going to run a clown circus or something like that. So the problem is it's obvious that the political system of the United States is not in the world of reality. That these candidates who are running, some of them may be decent people, but what they're doing is silly. It has no relevance to what the fate of the nation or the fate of civilization as a whole would be. Right now, Europe just went through another crackdown. 9 nations in Europe just have really lost a great deal in the past week. And there'll be more. It's almost inevitable at this point that Greece is going to be default and get out of the system. And with Greece going, the next thing is Italy, Spain, Portugal, and so forth. So we're in a process of a breakdown of the present so-called governance, which is running Europe. And then look at what's happening in the politicians out there. Our politicians as well. Our politicians are worse than those in Europe. Even though in Europe they have the advantage of not having any representation whatsoever. The governments of continental, Western, and Central Europe, essentially, have no governance. They have no sovereignty. The sovereignty was taken away from them. They're administered from outside continental Europe, administered by the British Empire. And the British Empire is having problems. The Scottish problem is being a bit of a pain for the British at this point. We're going through a process of a general breakdown crisis on the one hand, throughout the entire transatlantic period. And we're also on the edge of thermonuclear warfare. Now we have 2 agendas, say, in the United States on the warfare question. We have one agenda is the efforts to stave off triggers, detonators, which will set off a collapse of the U.S. system, a collapse into an international war, a war which would be thermonuclear. It's not a war against Syria. It's not a war against Iran. It's a war against Asia, China, Russia, a Eurasian nation, India, so forth, Pakistan. These nations are all on the extermination list because the British, who are for the economic collapse of the transatlantic region, they're for it. They say they intend, and they've said the royal family, the whole royal household and its retinue, has said the intention is to reduce the world's population from 7 billion people now to less than 1. Now, there are 1.4 billion people in China, 1.1 or 2 in India. What are you talking about when you say the reduction of the world's population to 1 billion from 7 billion? How would you achieve that? Well, a little thermonuclear war might do that for you, particularly if China and India, and Russia, and so forth are targeted. So on the one hand, you have serious politics. There are serious people in the United States. It's hard to find them in the members of Congress, but there are some intelligent people in the military and so forth. And in that section of our government, there is serious attention to some of these war problems and similar related kinds of problems. There is a recognition of a breakdown crisis and process, but not among the Wall Street admirers club. And look at what you're seeing with the politicians. They are babbling nonsense, which is absolutely irrelevant to any of the real issues. The real issue, a general breakdown crisis of the world system by spring. Because by spring, we're not going to be able to feed Americans at the present rate, under present policies. We've got a food shortage internationally, which has been orchestrated by the Wall Street types around the world. And we're about to see the Queen's hope of genocide against a good part of the globe to bring about a reduction of the world's population, human population, from 7 billion to less than 1. And that's not a long-term idea. You look through, for example, how many greenies are there in politics in the United States today? What's the greenie policy mean? Genocide. If you take the measures, which are called the green measures, you're going to reduce the ability to sustain the existing population of the United States, among other places. There is a worldwide cartel which has existed for some time. The Monsanto case, for example, illustrates this. We have a cartel which has taken over the control of food supplies and the prices of foods. We've had a policy by our government to destroy the ability of the United States to maintain the existing food supplies. Look at Texas. I mean, Perry in Texas is more than ridiculous. Perry himself is part of the bloc that's trying to starve the Texans to death. That's the only thing he seems competent to do. But he's got a lot of help from Obama. He must be a Democrat, huh? Anyway, well, at least some of the Republicans hope he is. He's such an embarrassment to them. So the point is, the problem is, you realize that you're talking about candidates. Most candidates, incumbents and candidates in the Congress have no relevance in their mind in what they think for the United States. They're talking baby talk, in effect. They're paying no attention to general thermonuclear war. And the leading military authorities in the United States are concerned about it. Other people, Russia's concerned about it. Others are concerned about it. We're on the verge of a large-scale extinction. So you have this situation, you have, as of today, for example, the latest today, again, measures are being taken, which are step-by-step measures, to try to avoid the outbreak of this general warfare. That's real. But at the same time, the same people who are saying this might work and that might work, they will say also, yes, but we can also consider that maybe none of this is relevant anymore. Because if we go into an actual outburst of thermonuclear war, they are irrelevant. And where's the irrelevance? We have a president of the United States who's clinically insane. Example, I said so in 2009, in April of 2009. I diagnosed this man's intellect absolutely correctly. There was no problem for me in doing that. I stuck my neck out, and everything I said about this guy's worked out exactly as I said it would. This guy's a lunatic who would, if the Congress had any brains, if the government had any brains, he would be lifted from office under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment as insane. He is clinically insane. And he's being used by the British Empire to bring the United States down, among other things. But all these issues that I know, and many of others out there know, politicians really know, if you talk to them separately, individually, they'll tell you, they'll discuss these problems and admit their problems, admit their leading problems. But when it comes to taking an issue, taking a stand on one of the issues that's going to decide whether that's going to happen or not, they back off. They show no guts. So if the United States is going to be saved from its own mistakes, in part, it's going to make some changes in its own behavior. The members of Congress, among others, the candidates are going to make a change in their behavior. They're going to dump the whole issue. I don't think you could get either a Republican or a Democratic majority in a general election of the United States today. I don't think it's possible. We're seeing what we're seeing, the worthlessness of the Republican candidacy so far. They may babble this and babble that, but they are not addressing any of the real issues that determine the continued existence of the United States and its people, among other things. So they're really not relevant people. So counting their noses doesn't get you anywhere except a boredom or threat or intimidation or fear. These guys are worthless or have been worthless up to now. And they're not necessarily worthless people, but they're people whose behavior as representatives of government are worthless. Is worthless. So therefore, when you have 6 people who are running for the U.S. government, you've got a big part of the actual worthwhile vote in hand. Because look at how many people are saying in these polls, none of the above. The American people don't want these characters. Even the ordinary citizen doesn't want these characters. They always say none of the above. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should have somebody running for the, under the name of none of the above. Who is none of the above? That's this outstanding candidate for this year so far. So the thing is, what I'm emphasizing is, do not count on counting noses. How many votes are out there as candidates? How many potential votes are out there is not really a measure, unless it's a measure of doom of the United States. So therefore, our approach is don't worry about the nominal polling on vote count. Don't pay much attention to it except as to a sick disease. Mm-hmm. We have to get the issue, real issues, up front. And as I indicated last week, there are two things which are primary things, which are constitutional issues. And that is, Glass-Steagall has to be put through in the original form. Anyone who's not for that just has no business being in government, a federal government. Secondly, we have to go to a banking system again, back to a national banking system. Without that, the United States cannot survive. And without these policies of the United States, the world won't survive. Not the way things are going now. And we're on the edge in the meantime still. At any moment, if you follow closely what the politics in government is in Washington, many people have an if clause in their policy. They say, if this doesn't happen, if this is controlled, maybe it won't happen. But if it does happen, there's nothing we can do about it under this agenda. And that's the truth of the matter. So what we should do, therefore, is don't get sucked into the so-called the issues. The issues don't mean a damn thing, except waste of time. We have to organize on the basis of things that are the real issues. Real issue is not, number one, is get this president out of office. If that's not done, there's no hope. The removal of this man from office before the election is probably the thing upon which the very existence of the United States depends. And anybody who says no, 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 no is one of the fools, and just say, okay, you're one of the fools. That's first number one. If you're not for throwing this guy out of office, you are not serious. Because he's a dictator, buddy. Nobody stops him. He breaks our Constitution regularly. Threatens to overthrow our entire series of government repeatedly. And nobody does much about it. No guts to do it. So we have the responsibility. And who gave it to us? Well, the people who didn't do the right thing gave it to us. The people who wouldn't vote for the right issues, who wouldn't raise the right issues. They're the ones who failed. But we have to stick, first of all, as I said, to the constitutional issues, which I went through last week. We also have to have a program, which is not one of the issues. We also have to have a program of the measures consistent with those constitutional measures, which is needed to revive the U.S. economy and to revive the world economy in cooperation with a group of other nations who are willing to do so. Russia's willing to do it. Russia's willing to sign the contracts, agreements with the United States, which are needed for many of these things. China is coming to the point that they're more clear on this. We have a positive development in Korea, where the government of Korea is going through an evolution which is very interesting to most people in Asia and other people. Japan will cooperate, and probably quite willingly, as we saw their reaction on the tsunami that almost blew that country apart. Their performance was the best in the world on this kind of issue so far. Now, so Japan is serious and valuable. India's got its own different problems, but they don't want to see Pakistan blowing up next to them, and that's a threat. They're concerned about these kinds of issues, as well as other issues. So there are people in the world, nations in the world, with leaderships which do have a serious commitment. Our job is to pull together leading forces from those nations who do have a significant part of their establishment committed to these issues. That's the difference. We must not depend upon the idea of how many votes we can get from among candidates for election. That's not the issue. How many candidates are fit to vote? That's the issue.
Well, the issue is definitely, I would agree, cowardice in the American Congress. One congressman recently said that he believed that Congress should be fired, that if they were employees, they should be fired for not doing their job. So, these guys know that they're not doing it. The issue of Glass-Steagall is obvious, and the fact that it has not been reinstated points to the issue of the British Empire. And I think that should continue to be raised is the fact that the British Empire sees Glass-Steagall as its annihilation. And if we are conscious of the fact that we have the potential right now to return to the credit system and shut down the British Empire, that gives people the enemy in the sights and the strength to fight, to know what our fight is.
Well, we have to have a programmatic approach to this. We can't be for something. We have to actually lead in driving. You have to be the hammer that drives the nail. Otherwise, the boards don't hold together.
Well, I think that's.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that what you've brought up, which is obviously we need Glass-Steagall to clean up the rot in the banking system, right? But it has to be immediately followed up with a credit system, which, as you have laid out, or the core of what a credit system is not simply we're changing the nature of finance or something, but we're reasserting a constitutional principle of that we have to develop for the future. And you look at projects like NWAPA, the question of Arctic development. This is all put on the table once we get this credit system in.
We're also talking about changing the world and changing the prospects of humanity more generally. And in going through these kinds of policy questions, there's another kind of chatter you have to be involved in. There are certain things which are points of task orientations, immediate action. There's also, you have to have a background of where do you think the human species is going? Right now, as you look at the weather systems, international weather systems, world weather systems, going into the galactic region, we find mankind is headed for a very dangerous encounter with developments in the galactic system. We're going into an area we don't know whether the human species can survive the changes, the specific changes which we do know are occurring. We don't know all the facts about these changes, but we do know the direction of these changes. We do know that in the past year, in this past year so far, and from last year already, that there is a tendency in the galaxy which is not being paid attention to as it should be. But we know about it, and it represents a great threat to the ability of humanity to survive. We have on the other side, again, not in a sense a constitutional issue, but probably higher than a constitutional issue. We have got to go to Mars. Now, one of the reasons we have to go to Mars is that if we don't go there, we are at great risk. Now, a number of scientists and a number of governments or scientific groups in governments have talked about that. What we're going to be putting up this week, and we've already mentioned it last week on the program, is that we have reached a point where now, at least from the standpoint of the scientific standpoint, we have defined what is necessary to get to Mars and why we should get there.
Yeah, right. As the astronauts have said, one planet is not enough. If you are going to put all of your eggs in planet Earth, you're setting up the human species for, at some point, being wiped out.
Yeah, but look at the other side of it. What's the answer? We not only have the questions and answers. Mm-hmm. We also have the knowledge of how this is going to work. Now, I'm not prepared, or is any of other people who are dealing with this, prepared to exactly carry out the program. But we know what the program is, and this past week we put it on our site. That we have finally reached the point which many of us have been thinking about for over 100 years. We've known that it's possible. It is possible to change the nature of the effect of time. That if you're going to send somebody to Mars, a group of people to Mars, you're going to have a uranium-driven impulse. In other words, you're going to have to be able to reach a speed relative to our present speed, where you can actually get to Mars in decent time. Just a trip or so, a week or so, no more. And we know before that we have a fusion driver program, which can be even faster. So the fact is that we have the scientific conceptual ability to a driver program to enable us to get it, to actually move, not as if you were living next door, but with a reasonable time difference between where we are on Earth and other parts of this solar system, interior parts.
Well, you can even think of that here in the United States, because if you look at, or on the planet, if you look at this maglev technology and traveling in a vacuum tunnel, because I was thinking if you can take a train that goes 1,000 miles an hour in a vacuum tube from New York to San Francisco, by clock time you would arrive at the same time that you left. And then there's 3 hours missing that you have to account for. I mean, did they exist or not while you're on the it would change the entire way we look at the United States. I mean, where you would work, where you would live, it would be totally different.
But that's already real. I mean, we just haven't built it.
Well,
but the concept is real.
Yeah.
Now, but this other thing is we've come to the point that time by itself and space by itself, as was said by Einstein and others over 100 years ago, that reality we're now on the edge of realizing it, or the capability of realizing it. We can get to Mars from Earth in such a lapse of time, which means that time and space as we have defined them, but conventionally, but it was never true. That over 100 years ago, it was known by leading scientists that it was never true. We have reached a point today, we're on the edge where it could be true. Not within a matter of next week, but in a very short period of time, not a century. We're at the point where we can take the rate of time will be changed from fusion form to thermonuclear fusion form. And prospectively beyond that, what we call mysteriously matter-antimatter reactions. Mankind can actually become an active living factor, not in the imagination, but in an actualizable reality. Now, I think at this point, we need that as an impediment to what's being done by some of these politicians. Because mankind must know, mankind's ability to survive, especially going into the galactic change in weather, which is happening now, which is in some degree an unknown. But we know from the history of this galaxy and solar system, we know that this is a very dangerous period for mankind right now. And unless we can do things such as conquering the illusion, which we call space and time. I mean, space and time are relative terms, but there's no such thing as absolute existence of space nor absolute existence of time as we define it. We've now become where with the advent of fission and with fusion, we've now come into a period where we are playing with potentialities, which mean that mankind is no longer in practice really condemned to be locked into one planet. And what the difference is this, it's also a great moral difference. The fact that we can see that now, is available to happen, means that we think differently about mankind than we have up to now. We tend to think pessimistically. We say, well, you can only do these things in this lapse of time. You're going to do this amount of thing. You're going to have this amount of power. We're entering a period where that's no longer true. It's no longer true. It was never true. It was never true to leading scientists in the past 100 years. And we've reached the point that in practice, for science today, people around the world, or a limited number of them, but real leading people, are actually thinking in these terms. So
I think the question of science today really starts with what we're discussing, the constitutional principle of our credit system, and what that exemplifies from the standpoint that we're talking about a Mars mission. The first thing in economics that we're expressing that has to be understood is this very question of what is the increase in the creative powers of the human mind that has to be expressed when we're talking about the increases in going from the energy flux density of going from one state of energy to the next. I mean, what is required to get us to Mars, is an increase in one's understanding of the advancements from going from solar or wind or wood-burning society to a fusion matter, antimatter society. Now the question is, right now, the problem that we're addressing in the destruction of science in this technological progress and scientific progress, which is essential for the advancements of mankind and the advancements of our scientific progress, NASA, what it's going to take for a Mars exploration, is the fact that you have this very question that was brought up at the beginning, is that you have an anti-science policy for the destruction and the killing of over 6 billion, 7 billion people on the planet. Now, the problem that we face is that the British Empire and their policy toward population reduction has put forth an anti-science policy of green fascism, which says that we have to go backwards in our scientific progress. And so a Mars mission is out of the question. Or they say, well, we have to create the conditions where a Mars mission is out of the question because you say, quote unquote, how do I pay for it? This is a monetary question. It can't be paid for. And this is what the real core of the issue gets down to, is the question of a monetarist view of man and view of society versus the productive capabilities and creative powers of man that is expressed in the idea of a credit system. And so I think when we're talking about the essential role of a Mars mission, we have to get at this very question of why it is that you have a policy of a British imperial policy to wipe out over 6 billion people on the planet. And this means a Mars mission is not going to be possible with that.
Well, there's more to it than this.
Keisha, I think you're getting right to the core of the moral question and the moral crisis that we're facing as a country, which is the constitutional crisis, which is that when you take the human mind out and you take the necessity of human discovery out, and you're left with a population which enjoys gambling, a population that gambles with their own life. For example, right now, what's very commonplace that you find is when you confront people with the reality that we're on the verge of World War III if Obama's not out, people say, oh, well, we're not going to get Obama out. That's not going to happen. Or you say, well, we're going to have thermonuclear war. If Obama's not out, this is the direction we're moving in. We're going to have economic crisis. And they say, well, they won't let that happen. And so somehow in people's minds, nothing really too bad or nothing really too good is going to happen no matter what. And you know, it is this kind of idea that there is just this kind of backdrop or continuity of time which is just going to continue. When in reality, and so therefore people gamble when it comes to thinking about candidates in presidential elections, as if a presidential election has no more consequence than if the Detroit Lions beat the Green Bay Packers, or they treat it like a buffet where all you can eat buffet where you go up one time and maybe you try something and see if you like it, and if you don't like it, you have another chance to go up and get something else. Whereas right now there is the point is there is a constitutional standard in this nation that was forged out of a deep understanding of natural law principles, which were the standard for whether or not human civilization, modern civilization, was going to be able to survive. And part of that was the idea of a commitment to not only life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for our own generation, but that the standard was actually 2 generations or 3 generations, the idea of posterity. And right now, that is what is determining the framework. It is the fact that the countries of East Asia are looking to overcome attrition. They're moving, and the British Empire are moving to stop them, and the only way they have to do that is by unleashing thermonuclear war on this planet. So that is immediately facing us. And so there are no qualified candidates on the basis of that understanding of reality at that point. And so this discussion here actually has to, that conception of natural law as what the Constitution was actually crafted within the framework of, actually has to determine, and that's our fight, is to determine that that is embodied in the presidency.
Well, going on a step further, though, if you had time to look at it this week earlier, we had on the site, in the morning, on the site, we had a presentation which is actually originally the work of Sky Shields. And what he worked on, which he and I have been discussing it along with others for some time, and we decided we're going to go with it now because we have the proof. Now, I don't know how many of you saw this on the site. And what we did there, exactly that. When Einstein and Max Planck and others at the end of the previous century, or the beginning of the last century, on the question that space and time, as defined by most of the quacks who are called scientists, does not exist. There is an idea of a lapse of time, or a distance which we can estimate in terms of space, but there is no such thing as a principle, a universal principle of time or space in the way that most people believe in it. And we're in a period where if you can fly from Earth to Mars and back, maybe on a weekend or maybe a little bit a week, if you can do that, you have changed man's relationship to the universe. You have changed the conditions of life of mankind. Now, we did this because what Sky put on went to the two options, which is fission, and the other is fusion, thermonuclear fusion. These are the two things which are really feasible to us as an alternative to all the kinds of things that this idiot like this stupid president of ours would talk about. Now, what this means is something else. There's also a moral principle in here which is much deeper than the simple, straightforward technology of how fast you can go in space. The point is, once you think about people dying, think about people living and dying. That's kind of constitutional, isn't it? And what your life will mean in the few years you have to live. If you can beat time, if you can do things physically, under an improved economy, under improved technology, that would probably take several lifetimes to accomplish today, you have changed man's view of man. If human beings can live longer, they don't think about, well, I'm so old, I'm going to die. I refute that. My enemies reject that, right? But if you can live the equivalent of 5 lifetimes today in what you can do in physical space-time, you have changed your relationship to the universe. You have given man a new dimension of the realization of what mankind really can become. What we have now in the development of thermonuclear technology, as that method brings us already into that question. I mean, the idea now, today, in terms of existing science, is we can actually create the effect of several lifetimes in one in terms of what mankind can do in progress. Now, when you think about what causes most people to become despondent, especially under the kinds of conditions of life they live under today, and they will say, no, it will never happen. No, it will never happen. No, it can never happen. We must be realistic. No, it can never happen. Again and again. We actually have had, as mankind, as the case of Einstein and Max Planck typify this thing, over 100 years ago. the conception of what the meaning of space and time are was clear to them. What they understood, and which some people today now understand, if we can increase the speed at which we can travel through the universe, and through so-called space and time, where you're able to effect in your lifetime, what would it take 4 or 5 lifetimes to do otherwise? You have given more meaning to, not just more benefit to mankind, you've given more meaning to life. Because the meaningfulness of life lies in what we can contribute to what future generations can do. The meaning of our life is what, since we're all going to die, the meaning of our life is what we can do in that lifetime that could not have been done before. Once you have that perception, that conception, you're no longer pessimistic about mankind. And since we have now the ability to, in our hands, the kinds of technology which can make that happen, this fact that this can be made to happen, and made to happen in a reasonable period of lifetime before us, or at least for most of you guys living today, that's what's important. Just change the question. Don't just always answer the question, sometimes change it. And when you change from going to, by balloon to Mars or something, somebody else's idea, and you're going at a thermonuclear fusion propulsion rate, you have changed the definition of mankind and the universe. You've changed mankind's attitude of itself toward itself. We're now at a point in this period of the darkest period of humanity so far in a long time. We're now at the same time, in terms of physical science potential, in terms of what people in Russia, in terms of people of China and elsewhere are looking toward, by our getting into agreement and collaboration with these other countries which are doing this, or people from other countries who are doing this, we have in our hands the ability to change, much for the better, what it will become to be a human being. Yeah, I think it's the best gift we can give them, is that. To give them a qualitative boost in understanding what it can mean, what it can be to be a human being. And take the desperate people on the streets out there now. Our poor people are sitting out there in the streets like castaways with no prospect for the future, but only worse and worse and worse is what they're getting now. Reverse that and say we don't accept that standard for mankind. We now go back and say, please, thank you, Albert Einstein. Thank you, Max Planck. Well, now we finally caught on to your message.
Well, that's the principle of the American system, you know, and what you've laid out, that the foundation of a credit system is it's not just simply a continuation, but you always have to have this process of development. Even, you know, as the point's been made, even if you were trying to stay the same, because of the rate of attrition, you have to make advances just to maintain the same, you know. But the historical conception of the United States is to make these kind of scientific breakthroughs with the idea that it is contributing something to the future. You know, and it's, you know, you contrast that to like what the British, the old Fabian crowd were putting forward with this idea of the guild system, that, you know, as my father hammered, I shall hammer too. And you have this zero technological growth, which is actually the same concept as what these greenies are putting forward. You know, that we can't develop, we can't advance. We have to find some sort of stasis that actually doesn't exist. So, but that principle of development, that is the core of the American system.
Yeah, I had one of the clear problems that I'm running into personally. I think all of us may be having a similar situation with the U.S. population, is this question of the practicality. And every last one of the candidates we've got up there today is clearly playing into the hands of the practical side of the American population, where we need them to look at the solar system, their view of space, time. It's all rigidly, everything we know about it is basically what we know here on Earth until we decide to go into space. Now, what we're trying to do is get a qualitative upshift in the way that the population thinks about themselves and their own worth. The problem that we're running into is that the population has a difficulty in conceiving of these things 50 or so years after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, where he had a very clear mission, a clear developmental perspective, and he planted the seed of what he wanted to do in the minds of the American people in his first inaugural address, when he said, "Ask not what America can do for you, ask what we as a citizenry can do for all of humanity." And I think that kind of mission, that kind of stated mission, is what the American people need right now. I had a guy who told me, when I mentioned the fact that the Euro system was collapsing, he said, "Oh, it's good. Actually, I like what you're saying. What you're talking about is something that will happen down the line, so I'm glad you're doing this. I hope you keep running." And I said, well, now, 3 days after I spoke to him, there's a very real threat after the Standard & Poor's downgrade of 9 European nations that we could wake up tomorrow morning, that's Monday morning, and find that the whole international financial system has ceased to exist. And so for people to get out of the practicality of politics, it's a great irony to me, because you have people who are thinking practically when everything around them is completely impractical, and there's a complete shift. And so for us to put forward the concept of the credit system, that you're giving something to future generations forever, and that your great-great-great-great-grandkids are going to be of a qualitatively, perhaps even a different species of sorts. They're going to be thinking in terms that you never thought of. The likes and the loves that you have today will be totally different for your great-great-grandchildren. That idea is something that the American people have got to take up, because if they don't fight on that higher level now, and we're leading them, we're saying here's what we've got to do, then they are not going to be able to overcome even the most practical of problems that they're facing.
We find that the American people, how right now, are more pessimistic than leaders in Russia or the leaders in China. Mm-hmm. When you look at what is happening in the Eurasian part of the world, where it's not as desperate, not as demoralized as it is in the transatlantic region, you find that there are ideas out there which are constant with what I just spoke about just a few moments ago. What China is a leader in its effort on space exploration. China, which has no part of its territory in the Arctic, is building equipment which is designed to deal with an Arctic development in the Pacific region. So that apart from the stubborn, defeated, demoralized American who says you can't do this, you can't do that, which is what you're getting from Obama, this man is spreading poison. He's also lying like hell. A man's a liar, he's a lunatic, he's all these other good things. You know? And we are tolerating it when we have the instruments of law to throw him out of office and end this torment that we're going through here. The point is, there are parts of the planet which are struggling to move ahead. And out of China, which has years of backwardness, which again and again and again is suffered through, but is still fighting and trying to progress. Russia came through a very bad period. They're fighting to develop some of the most advanced technology on this planet for the benefit of mankind as a whole, mankind as a species. And the problem is, we've got to get across to the Americans. Their problem is their pessimism, the stink of their pessimism about mankind itself. It's like we were going to get some kind of an unexpected bonanza if you're allowed to live a couple more days when you go into a hospital.
We also have to remember that we were the leaders in this progress for mankind. And as Summer was just stating, it is the case that if you think back to the assassination of Bobby and John F. Kennedy, we saw the entire physical economic production and the economy of the United States continue to take a rapid decline, especially in the 1970s, the early 70s, when you had Nixon come in and take the dollar off the gold standard, which President Franklin Roosevelt, which destroyed the Bretton Woods system policy that President Franklin Roosevelt had set up. And since that time, you've seen a commitment to a system of monetarism. This is the British imperial system, away from the policies which represent the standard for true economic progress, physical economic progress. I mean, we're looking at today, what are we seeing? We have a fascist president who is now pushing to cut over 250-something USDA food services. And so we're looking at a situation where the commitment toward a population reduction, starving the population, forget about, yes, thermonuclear World War III, but the British Empire has several ways which they're going to push their policy for genocide. And the population and people who are in leadership have to understand right now that if they are not moving to immediately throw this president out of the White House with the 25th Amendment, and if the population is continuing to allow for the cowardly Congress and so-called leadership to get away with these policies, then they will be just as guilty for the murder of those billions of people whose lives will be lost through the starvation or due to thermonuclear World War III. So I think the core is that what we're discussing here is what has to be understood as the non-optional alternative to the survival of mankind and survival of this nation.
Well,
and I think that Russia and China and other nations are ready to work with us on that. The policies that we're talking about right now, it was the United States and the Apollo program, the space program that Russians are and the Chinese are modeling off of. And so the question is, what happened to the population's morale and what happened to their commitment to that type of future progress?
You see it every turn of the trick. Huh? Every turn. Just exactly that. What they're saying is stupid. What people are saying to each other is stupid. It's false. It's stupid. We don't have to put up with this stuff. We've given way.
In a certain way, it might seem to many Americans that it's a great irony that Russia and China are the two nations that are, one, pushing the war avoidance policy right now, and secondly, pushing the only policy for optimism that the American population has. But if you just look at the history, and you see that the American system had influenced both China and Russia profoundly, and that we always have, for most of U.S. history, we've been a great ally of China. We've been a great ally of Russia. And in a certain sense, what they're doing to us now is they're returning the favor. They're approaching us and saying, here's what we can do. We can do the Arctic development. We can do the scientific endeavors. And you have this wealth of great science in Russia. This is generally not put in the U.S. media. Much of what's really happening isn't put in the U.S. media. And the real core of opposition to the war policy and to the economic collapse in the United States is what we're doing here with this discussion. And I think that what we are talking about here in terms of the development policy is quite beautiful, because we're going to be running into the exact same challenges with as regards the Arctic policy, the exact same challenges we're going to run into on the moon when we start to face the temperatures we're facing on the moon, when we start to look into the development of helium-3 and fusion power off of the moon's surface. We're going to have to begin the kind of challenges we're going to face. We're going to start here on Earth, but then we're going to realize, as we start to look more and more into this, that we were actually, in a certain sense, strategically placed here on Earth to overcome our petty problems in regards to nations, to reach common goals of mankind, which we have reached. The Constitution is everybody, not just Americans, it's everybody. It has these human principles. And then we find out that we have a strategic position here on Earth to now go and explore for the sake of all humanity. This is sitting here for us to do. Russia's put out the hand to us. China's put out the hand to us. They're ready to go with it. Now the American people have to reach their hand out and clasp onto our friends across the Pacific.
Walk with me on this a bit, because there's another aspect of this. It's not just the facts are the facts. The facts about the obvious changes in behavior, mental behavior and so forth, by American citizens and so forth, and politicians. These are facts. But what causes this from generation to generation of degeneration? Since the death of John F. Kennedy and the death of Robert, who was just about to become nominated for presidential candidate, the assassination of these two by British influence Wall Street types who did it. They did the assassination. And the Oswald was a fake story. This is done by 4 other guys who came in from Europe through Mexico into Texas and killed the president and left town before anybody caught on to what was happening. Then the name Oswald came up. But then Bobby was killed, assassinated. He was just about to receive the nomination for the Democratic Party as a presidential candidate, and he was wiped out. And what we got? We got Nixon. All right. What I've experienced in my lifetime, well, I was born, some time ago. So I was born for 20 years of my life. Were born on the upside. We moved down and then up. My experience was of what Roosevelt's program did to change the direction of the United States from all the way plunging down into up. Then we had a shock effect with Truman, who was a piece of crap. And we went down, 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 despite Eisenhower's resistance against this nonsense. Then Kennedy took a surge beyond what Eisenhower had done, and they killed him. And the cover-up, the Oswald story, the cover-up of the assassination of Kennedy, and the war, 10 years of war in Indochina. And the key issue of killing of Kennedy, Kennedy was blocking the war. And Kennedy's enemies, including Democrats, wanted the war. And they couldn't get the war as long as Kennedy was alive. Because Douglas MacArthur, Eisenhower, and others had said, this is murderous, this is idiocy. But the killing of Kennedy and the cover-up demoralized the American people, including President Johnson. Demoralized him to the point he became nothing. And he admitted it personally before he died, even while he was still president. What we've had is, then we had the baby boomers who came to power. And you have to look at things like Mark Rudd, what happened at Columbia University and so forth, and spread throughout the nation. You had Mark Rudd and company were organizing on a mass basis for their terms of effort, a celebration in praise of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. And the politics of the United States, as I know it, from that period, is exactly this. So now we have the people on the streets, the young people on the streets, with no future people, totally demoralized. What is moving ideas? Issues? Issues aren't moving ideas. It's generation and degeneration that moves the process of ideas in society generally. And it's not that we're going to give something that people that they want. They don't know they want it. Or they believe that society doesn't want it, and therefore they think it's the smart thing to do is to adapt to society and pretend that they're not excited about it too. If you're going to change the people of this nation, you're going to have to go to the gut of the problem. You're not going to do it on issues. You're going to do it on confronting the population with its own gut. Because what they've got is 3 generations of good go to hell. And it's built up and gotten worse from generation to generation to generation. The education, the habits of life, everything about the U.S. population has gotten worse since the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and they got away with it. And therefore, the problem we have to deal with the domain of ideas as it affects the movement of the minds of people from various parts of their generation, decade after decade after decade in their generation of life. And what we've had all the way through is down, 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 down. And you go to a people and say, well, these are the issues. Hey, people, these are the issues. These are the facts, people. And you get no response. Or you get a very weak response. Why? Because you haven't attacked Mark Rudd. You haven't attacked the people who covered up. Exactly. I mean, the guy's a piece of crap.
Well, you had in that whole period also the Congress of Cultural Freedom, and as I think about it, because what makes us human? It's not our physical, pleasure, pain. Do you like sex? Do you like it with people, with animals, with, whatever, right? And so what was the line of that? It was the destruction of classical music, classical art. Everything's about me. Forget about the future. Feel good. And if you try and act for another person, if you try to do something selfless, you're just a dumb sucker because no one will appreciate it. Because really, all you can do is look out for yourself.
It's worse. This is the principle of evil.
Yeah, it's the Iago principle. That's exactly what he states in Othello. Iago, he says, the idea that somebody is good, oh, that's just a clown. That's just a dumb sucker.
Yeah, exactly. So you're considered savvy if you're emotionless, right? If you're not affected by billions of people being exterminated, then you are considered a reputable, intelligent person. If you get impassioned about something, then you must be crazy, because how could you think that you could change history?
What makes them evil? Fear. Fear. They don't find in themselves the inspiration to do the things that defy fear. Right. For example, this is where the importance of the Iliad, for example. The Iliad is a true story, in a sense. That is a true story historically. But what's significant about is the poem. Because the poem actually gives an accurate portrayal of what the degeneration was. And the Peloponnesian War was a factor in a massive degeneration in the civilization. And it was a concession to evil which brought around that problem. Take Hitler. What's the Hitler phenomenon? Well, Hitler was created by the British. That's a fact. And it was helped by Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush and the grandfather of George W. Bush. It's a line of descent, and you know what I mean by descent. But so we've gone through a process where we concede to what we are told is our advantage by kissing the butt of the enemy. And you see that lesson in the way that that's from the Odyssey. It's there, the same thing. The Iliad and so forth. It's the same thing.
Well, there's a time in the Peloponnesian Wars I was very struck when they get hit with the plague. And because the culture itself is so degenerate that everybody decides to do whatever is the most criminal thing they can do because they know that they're going to die. So they say, okay, now is the time that I can, get together with my neighbor's wife. Now's the time I can take everything because I'm not going to live, they're not going to live. So you see, in kind of horrible, bold relief, the result of a totally degenerate culture. And then their response to a crisis is, let me be the extreme of degeneracy before I die, and that's it.
The alternative is always then power. If you can show mankind that there is a power that exists, which is more powerful than the enemy, then you give people the optimism. You can have a turn in society based on that kind of optimism about life itself. And that's the only thing that will work. That's why criticizing the enemy as we do. It's correct, but it's not efficient. What you require is actually a sharp demonstration of what fools these people were. And that's how good the alternative is. And that's the only way in history. And that's the whole significance of classical literature, classical artistic composition, is always that. You turn things around under the most evil circumstances. And by doing that, that's what Shakespeare did with his dramas, exactly that. Is to take a situation of absolute evil and demonstrate, as in his dramas, all of them involve this kind of thing, except the simple plays. And the same thing is true in history. The power of Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the way in which the American Revolution was organized. It was organized in Massachusetts from the beginning, with the Pilgrims, were a minor factor, but it's a crucial one. And then they part of the same party, which came as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And this thing made a revolution. You look at the development of the economy of Massachusetts, of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, prior to the Venetian Party, the new Venetian Party's intervention, and you see what the development was, and you see how the party was crushed, and how Massachusetts became degenerate, and therefore the victims of this thing then, like Benjamin Franklin, fled to Pennsylvania, where they saw an opportunity to inspire the population again. And so the key thing here is not to criticize errors and say, we've got a program, this could be better. You're already lost at the start with that, because you are not addressing the problem of evil. You're saying, I'm going to propose something that would be nice. I'm going to criticize you for your mistakes. You don't win. You win only when you actually overwhelm evil by good. And good means a change from bad to good. It doesn't mean the improvement of bad. And the problem with most politicians who think they're fighting evil in politics, and often they're right that it is evil they're fighting, but they keep losing. Why do they lose? Well, sometimes it was not possible to win. But the reason we lose in the United States is because we don't attack the problems that we have to attack and show the revolutionary changes which they are denying themselves of by not taking it on. What happened in World War II? What Roosevelt did, the optimism that Roosevelt contributed. When the British set up World War II, they'd already set it up. You had Coolidge and Hoover had been presidents. They were taking the United States down with their ideology. Roosevelt went beyond that. And he created optimism in the people who were most despairing, and those who recognized that they were despairing. And we had to do something about the despairing people in the United States, something qualitative, not just suggestions of improvements. And then we got into the war. We went a transformation which I experienced in my lifetime then. And how the opposite occurred also within my lifetime, most of the time, my lifetime, so forth. Right? This is what motivates. This is the real politics, is not the so-called practical explanation, this will work, that won't work, this is good, that's not good, this is popular, that's not popular. Right? All those kinds of silly, foolish politics. I say we can reach Mars and beyond.
Well, Lynn, I think the times that we've had the kind of mission orientation under Roosevelt, under John F. Kennedy with the space program, that is what provides a foundation for restoring morale and morality, a sense of a true mission orientation. And it's useful to note that at this point, it can only be that. We can't just simply go back to the way things are and maintain the present levels of population even. We have to have these kinds of new missions like a Mars program to get the relevant technological advances to enable the the kind of growth patterns we need just to sustain the present level of populations and prepare for the coming population. So I think that without that, number one, you won't be able to restore a sense of true optimism, but that's really the only way mankind can go anyway.
Why did the American population respond to the assassination of Kennedy the way they did? That's another question. It's a different question. It's not just good suggestions. It's the attack on evil by good. And good is always a fundamental change from the direction of bad. What happened with Kennedy was not the fact that he was assassinated. The way they actually used the assassination of Kennedy, the way the British used the assassination of Kennedy to bring the United States down, was by getting people who made the whole death a matter of ridicule. The Oswald myth was what was used to destroy the United States by exploiting the Kennedy assassination and making a joke of it, which demoralized the American people. And the cowardice of people who refused to do anything about what they knew. You don't think Johnson knew that the Warren Commission was a fraud? He said so in his lifetime, while he was still president. They were going to get him next. He could see the rifles aimed at the back of his head, too.
And you can see what you're talking about, this evil, that it's manifested itself in cowardice. And it goes against what are the principles and natural law of our universe, which actually governs the universe, is that if you choose not to act, and if you choose to be cowardly, then you are risking and putting at risk the potential for mankind's existence. And I mean, this is what we're talking about right now, what Dave just said on this question of, I think the space program and Mars mission that you're discussing is not just a question of this is a nice idea, or, this would be a increase in man's progress in the universe. Yes, it would be those things, but it's also the question of we're now at a point where the existence of mankind is now being put at stake. We're faced with the potential and the threat of mass extinction. And so the question is, how do we actually deal with these challenges and these scientific questions that are now being put before mankind? When you see that we have destroyed the capability to put forth the needed extended sensorium so that we can address questions such as the weather threats, severe weather threats, galactic threats to mankind. So we can address certain questions such as how it is that we're going to deal with some of the things that are threatening mankind here on Earth. The weather of crisis of, such as what's happening with the droughts and the storms, tornadoes, various other things. So the point is that I think we're now at the point of whether or not we're going to take up these very challenges as a part of, as the key issue of our political representation, how it is that this is going to be the only discussion, the discussion that's on the agenda, how we save mankind from the threat of mass extinction.
Mm-hmm. We're going to need some damn good statesmen to get this across to the American people.
Well, it does go back to man's conception of man, as you were saying, because when you think about a 1G accelerated flight to Mars, you're talking about creating gravitational reference frames. You're talking about bending time. And the idea, this is an oligarchical idea that man is a slave to something like an absolute time or absolute space. The idea that man would be a slave to anything that he can't change is the kind of state of mind that an oligarch induces in a person. But to think that you can change things, you can change anything, you can change time, you can bend space. This is the kind of difference in the way that man thinks about man.
But also the question of saying something that's evil, defining it as evil, but also identifying the change, which is the reversal against evil.
Yeah.
The two things are both essential.
Yeah.
Well, no, just on this whole question of evil and optimism, I was thinking about this British proposal for the space program, which would be really good given the slate of Republican candidates and Obama, which was they were saying they weren't sure that we could get the people back from the planet that we sent them to. So maybe we should actually launch a mission with the Republican candidates and Obama at its helm and let them do the first flight on that program.
Yeah, Obama is the question. Is that man is evil. There's no doubt of that. He is truly evil. But he also, remember, he didn't become president because he was evil. He was selected to become president because he was found to be evil.
Mm. Well, you called that. I mean, that was the amazing thing, which is what you did in April of 2009 when you identified exactly what his personality was and what that would lead to.
And he's everything I said, he's lived up to it. Exactly. He is the reincarnation of the Emperor Nero. In terms,
ready to blow up the world unless we stop him.
So, and the point, his power lies in the fact that the British Empire did it. He's nothing but a British puppet, but an evil one. But the fact is that we decided to go along with evil.
Right.
His behavior as a candidate, his contention as a candidate, the way his campaign was funded by the British, dope money, and fake money, fake contributions actually, fake one, set up by Dope Incorporated, that this thing which was known, we knew it, and yet this fat man was made president when he never was actually elected by the rules. But they decided not to take that into account, which was evil. And it was done by men of evil. What Wall Street? Wall Street is nothing but men of evil. What do they do? They steal. They call it gambling, is the closest they come to the truth. It's gambling. They use gambling as a way of robbing the people by tying their fortunes to their condolence of gambling.
Right. Well, remember the Enron tapes.
Yep. So and therefore the problem here is always you've got to deal with not with good suggestions. That does not win against an enemy. Just put this in the hands of bullets. And people with guns. Do you think that being a nice guy stops a guy who's coming to kill you with a gun? Do you think don't you say he has his rights, he has his opinions too? No, you say, well, he's got his opinions, but for precisely that reason he should not be allowed in government. We do have principles we call law. And when we violate those principles to condone a presidency, which is unfit to exist morally, we have committed a crime of negligence. And it's not something which requires better talking or better influence or better ideas. It means you've got to get out and fight that thing that gives people the courage to join you. That's the only thing that ever worked for me against this evil.
And the fight is not going to be waged by the parties. The very fact that Obama was able to be selected by drug pushers and made the candidate of the Democratic Party, and the way that every candidate is giving into this evil, it shows exactly why the fight must be on the constitutional principle itself, and that the very structure and the very way that the parties are set up is to basically prevent that from coming through.
Yeah, you can use the words, but you must give substance to the words.
I definitely think that having put the Hitler mustache on Obama when you put this out, Lynn, I think that this was the substance. I think that the nature of that fight, we suffered the slings and arrows initially from the population that didn't quite understand what you meant by Emperor Nero. They needed to catch up on their Roman history and things like that. But now that people have done that, 3 years later, they have a good sense that this guy is quite insane. And I think that the signing of this National Defense Authorization Act, just to make this point, we've seen a lot of people, those last clingers on, have now said, we're shifting over, and we know that this guy is a complete and total fascist. And what both Dave and Bill have seen on these college campuses is that even these young kids who have not had any sense of future, who have been destroyed by the culture, are running up to the table because they have some sort of inherent sense that the last of their rights are being taken away. This is dictatorship.
But we've got to give them the positive one at the same time.
Right.
And therefore, we can no condolence to this crap. We have to really realize you're dealing with evil, but you can't fight evil simply by calling it evil. You have to present the contrary.
Right, and you see that if people just have the courage to fight this evil and to know what it means to be human, that this is the question that we're actually addressing right now. I mean, if we had just even 1% of the population that would get out there and just say, no more of this, Obama must be removed, you would see everything shift. If people took a stand and called for this guy's removal, it's interesting, you're looking at a situation where Americans are saying, well, that sounds good, but good luck. It's never going to happen. And, I was just watching what this gentleman, the taxi cab driver in Italy is doing when he's going out there and organizing 20,000 of his taxi cab union friends to get out there and say, we have to stop this policy of the British Empire's policy for monetarism, their policy of monetarism, and their policy that is killing the population. And if the American people would just get out, I mean, you have people, taxi cab drivers in Italy demanding a return to Glass-Steagall. When in the Congress, we're saying, well, there's 60 co-sponsors that have signed on to Marcy Kaptur's 1489 Glass-Steagall Act. Why hasn't this gone through yet? Because we're allowing for the puppet in the White House to remain in there, and we're saying, well, there's nothing you can do about it. And I think the question of how the population have accepted a gamble with their lives, playing Russian roulette with their lives, can't be tolerated anymore. And we have to go out, get the population to stand up on their two hind legs and decide they're going to fight, not just for their own survival, but they're going to fight with the understanding that this means a commitment to the next several generations, their children, their grandchildren. I mean, this is the real question of love for humanity, is acting not just for yourself, but acting for the future generations, and actually doing what is necessary for defending those generations. And people who call themselves leaders today, who are not representing that, are not fit to lead, and that's what the status should be for anybody who thinks that they're fit to be leadership. Are they taking up this question for defending the future of mankind? And then they have the guts to tell the truth. That's the real question.
Okay.
That is it. I just think we ought to realize that what I've tried to emphasize in this thing is we've got to go to real fundamentals. And space is the area where it's tested. That's what we're pushing on, doing from the basement work, is concentrating on this. And that's where the fight lies. And as I say, over a century since Max Planck and Einstein began giving a new view of how the universe is organized, we've now come to the point that developments themselves have shown us that how the concept will work, with so many of the facts to go with it. And we have to get people to see the hope of mankind, what's beautiful out there, what can be done, what can be accomplished, rather than just trying to fight issues. Because fight issues, you get stuck on the same level as the enemy. And he's able to fight you on his terms and say that he's got to be treated with respect, when your job is to discredit him. You have to discredit evil. You can't just oppose it. And you've got to discredit evil by showing what good is. I think we can do it, but we're not going to do it on the simple thing of votes on toe-to-toe, place-to-place kind of thing. We're going to do it by hitting a shock effect in the population, on confronting them with the concept of the difference between evil, which is now in power, and good. We have some older military people and others who have so far been this principal factor in delaying this president, Obama, from launching thermonuclear war as he had intended. We have to be very clear that Obama, a British puppet, and with accomplices like Senator Kerry. Senator Kerry played a criminal role in pushing through the Senate a bill which opened the gate for the Libya war. And he degenerated since the time he did that in his behavior, a shocking behavior. He adapted to evil.
And his claim to fame is to be Mr. Anti-War.
Yeah. Well, no, it is a change in him.
Yep.
He capitulated. I don't know why, but he did. And the point is that we didn't fight that. Some people did try to fight it, but there was very little support for that, effective support. And as a result of that thing, where Obama pushed this through and used him, Kerry, to get it through as a key figure at that moment, that resulted in a crime against humanity in the Libya war, a violation of the U.S. Constitution, and nobody undid it. Nobody said no. Nobody said it was wrong. And then you had judges, or a judge in particular, who condemned members of Congress for saying it was wrong. Yeah. And it was wrong. He says, you have no authority to say so. Yeah. Corruption in the judges. And then people will say, well, you didn't win. Huh? You guys didn't win. You lost. Therefore, you have to accept the loss. Because we cheated. Of course we cheated. Wall Street is one big cheat. Huh? But Wall Street's debt is what we're paying. And it never can be repaid. We conceded to this crap. And we gave reasons. Huh? He had his reasons. Huh? And therefore, the clear definition of evil is necessary. But the definition of evil is not sufficient. Good has to be replaced evil. And that's the lesson of history. And what Americans and others have been doing against those who are opposed to this crap, they've been failing because they failed to do the one essential thing, is overwhelm the force of evil by taking it head on, by affirming what is good and pushing for what is actually good. Not improvements, not nice gestures, not good causes, but forcing through a change of that type. And that's what we have to do. And we just have to realize that good suggestions and solid argument is not sufficient. That the power of goodness is the only thing that can, as an achieved goodness, is the only thing that can overcome evil. And that's everything we know about history, including the Peloponnesian War, the lesson which we have to learn. The problem is not wrong policies. Policy is a succession of degeneration, of moral degeneration of our population and our institutions over the period since, in particular, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And they got by with it. And they used that. They destroyed a whole generation of young Americans with the war in Indochina. And we're still suffering from that. And that degeneration of a young generation there resulted in a degeneration of the following generation. And we say, well, we'll make some suggestions. We'll criticize it. But how can you deal with a disease? By arguing against it.
We'll say we have to take the lesser of two evils.
That's the next step.
Evil.
The next step down.
Yeah.
No, and that's where we fail sometimes in our association. Often because we try to be, people tell us, well, make some good suggestions. Suggest something interesting. We'll see. We'll give you some credence. Maybe you'll get somewhere with that. Maybe you could be successful. Try it out. But don't come in here and tell us to stop our doing evil. Don't shut down the gambling house. Don't shut down the whorehouse. But make some good suggestions. Maybe out on the street you can talk about these things and people will hear you. Maybe they'll like your opinion. Maybe it'll stop. But if you don't combat evil in the right way, by understanding what evil is, and you're out to destroy it by overwhelming it with achievement. That's what you do in warfare. You beat the enemy by achievement. That's how you win wars. That's how you win elections. We have the stuff in us, but we're hounded by education and ethics and so forth, by people who think they're wise guys and say, you guys make this mistake, you make this mistake. You keep saying things like that. That's not the way you're going to get ahead in this society. Yeah, but where is the society headed toward? Maybe we don't want to get ahead that way. Maybe we want to go in the other direction. I mean, I've shot a rabbit myself once or twice.
Right.
A major one once. That was enough for me. But I mean, it was a kayak. And I shot a nice 3-class rapid in Canada. It was a nice experience. I enjoyed it greatly, but I wouldn't do it again. So that's it. Our weakness as an organization is we give in too much to the demand that we prove ourselves by saying some kind of nice things about somebody and something. Like that, take those Republicans who are running for office this season for president. Well, as a group, they're worse than a bunch of damn fools. Now, one of them at least was an intelligent man, as probably still is. But he wasn't doing any good, even though he was an intelligent man, or is an intelligent man. But he wasn't doing any good on this occasion. He was doing nothing to reverse the work of evil. He was going along with it, competing for a leading position, on the assumption that if he were to become president, then he would do good things. But he never got to do the good things because he didn't try. He tried to win in the hope that that would lead to give him the opportunity to do some good things. And that's where a lot of our people make mistakes in politics, is on exactly that issue. When you want to fight evil, you've got to fight it. Don't fight it foolishly. Don't fight it stupidly. Don't make an ass of yourself. but fight it. Figure out how to destroy evil and replace it with good. But that's your condition. Destroy evil. I'm out to destroy evil. What's your policy? I'm out here to destroy evil. Unlike my opponents.
That's a good place.
That's true.
Right.
And that's the thing that concerns me. Here we are. We got 6 candidates. We'll get more. But how are we going to actually win? Apart from making good suggestions. We're going to win because we're going to go out there to destroy evil. Not to propose to destroy evil, but to destroy it. The difference.
FDR understood what it meant to destroy evil. Kennedy understood what it meant to destroy evil, and Lincoln understood this, and they understood it to the point that they were even willing to put their own lives on the line because they knew that destroying this evil was going to come back after them. And when it comes to thinking about Lincoln and Kennedy, they knew who the enemy was and who they were actually fighting. And it wasn't somebody from the other side, from the other party, or some, partisan thing. It was this question. The evil was actually taking on the empire that sought to destroy the existence of mankind. And that's what people don't see today. They think that, evil is, going after those dirty liberals or, going after some kind of dirty Republican GOPers or whatever, and it's a red team versus blue team. But they're not seeing that both of them are being just played in the whole game of the British imperial game to use them as tools and as suckers. And so you're looking at these presidential elections or, the congressional elections, and people get played into this whole game when they don't understand that this whole process is just being run by an imperial drive toward pitting these so-called groups against each other. And so, this question of evil, true statesmen of that nature, such as Lincoln, understood how to flank the enemy. But at the same time, they lost their lives over it. And then that's the question you get to. People say, well, wait a minute, look what happened to Kennedy. Look what happened to Lincoln. Look what happened to Dr. King. They were fighting this evil, but, their lives got taken. I don't know if I want to commit myself to that, or I don't know if I want to be put in that position. And so then that's the question of one's, commitment to and one's true immortality. It is how you understand that your life, it goes beyond the existence of, the seeking of pleasure and doing what is popular and practical in society, but you may have to do things that are going to, that's going to, put your life in risk, even though you may not want to do that.
Yeah, but the greatest evil sometimes is the politician or someone else who says, ask what they're doing. They say, I'm out to win. And for them, that is everything. Out to win is a substitute for morality for many. Because they don't define what winning is for humanity. Are you out to win an election? Are you out to win praise? Or are you out to win something for humanity? And what happens in these election campaigns, they get this degeneration of out to win for this, win that, like a prize in a gambling contest. Or are you out to win something for humanity? And that distinction, you have two people saying they want to win. One wants to win it for humanity, the other wants to win it, just win anything, just to win an election. And that's right from Dante's Inferno. They won their way into hell. And so what we're doing is essential, and I believe with the help of Max Planck and Albert Einstein, we might win. But we will win not for ourselves, we will win for humanity, and that will be good for us.
Good. Okay, I think that brings a conclusion to our discussion. Thank you, everybody who participated, and thank you, everybody who was watching. And as I said in the beginning, make sure you tune in on Wednesday for Lyndon LaRouche's live broadcast, The State of the Union, January 18th. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned.